are one of the first doctors and the first doctor in Canadian history to prescribe psychedelic mushrooms to patients through the healthcare system in Canada.
Who responds best to this medicine?
We found that there are some people who respond well and some people who don't. I had a patient who I was really struggling with. It was a young woman who had metastatic cancer. We could not deal with her pain. She couldn't talk about dying. She couldn't talk about living. And while she was in the medicine, she really had a very difficult journey. And I said, well, we tried it. It doesn't seem to have worked. And then 24 hours later, her pain was gone. You know, I think psychedelics have this potential to be a game changer in mental illness, mental health, because of the ability to process trauma. And if we think of human health as being the physical, the mental, it's relational, societal, and spiritual, then the psychedelics would be holding spiritual. Dying is a spiritual crisis. Let's face it. As far as people saying, well, these are dangerous drugs, well, psilocybin, you can't actually overdose on psilocybin. Pharmaceutical companies, they spend billions of dollars in research and development. With psilocybin, it's a natural product. You can't actually patent it.
We don't know a lot about clinical trials. When I hear 80%, I think 80% is really good.
I mean, some treatments for diseases, success rate is 10%.
Oh my goodness.
A lot of research dollars go into treatments that are designed to prolong life. No research dollars in spending money looking at improving quality of life. There's no cure, but there's no healing. And healing is spiritual. And you can heal while you're dying.
Well, hold on. Have you done psilocybin?
Well,
Welcome back to another episode, but before we get this one started, I think it should be made clear that we do not condone the use of any illicit substances, and speaking to your doctor before you decide to take anything. Always speak to your doctor first. I think right now the biggest problem we're facing in the first world is mental health. I think that it has been neglected for far too long, and we've made crazy advancements in improving our physical health. Not enough progress when it comes to mental health. This episode is dedicated to anyone who has lost a loved one or is someone or knows someone that is dealing with a life-threatening illness or injury. So yeah, enjoy the show. Welcome back to another episode of Limelight. Today we have a very special guest. Actually, I'm like, I've been a fan of this person. They're like a celebrity to me, so I'm actually really honored to seriously, even though I've spent some extra time with you over the last few days, you are truly a celebrity to me. And when I emailed you, I told you, I guess almost 3 years ago when I emailed you, I was like, okay, how do I make sure this email, she reads it? She's a busy doctor. She's never going to want to email me back. And then you've been nothing but friendly and treated us like family. So thank you so much.
sure. I mean, you're just another human. So it's all good.
Yeah, this is Dr. Valorie Masuda. I've just learned more about you since yesterday, more or less. You know, it's rare to find, when you want to find gems, you have to look hard for them. So I'm super impressed by, your resume and what you do and how passionate you are about healthcare. And I'm looking forward to this podcast today.
So you help patients that are at the end of their life, majority of the time, palliative care, would you say?
Yeah, but palliative care is more than just people at the end of their life. So palliative care encompasses from the time somebody has a diagnosis of life-limiting illness, and that can be cancer or it could be chronic obstructive lung disease or whatever, to the point that they actually have, they move into their dying time. So really that can be over several years, and it's better over several years because what my job is to understand what the patient's understanding is of their disease and then share information with them so they have a good understanding of what their disease encompasses, what their treatment options are, so they can make informed decisions that are aligned with their own personal values and priorities. Because, in the medical system, our priority is to make people live longer for, putting them through, I call it the medical ringer. And so sometimes patients aren't given the choice to get off the gerbil wheel. So, my job is to understand what their priorities are and then help them make good treatment decisions based on their own personal values. And going forward, we look at, as their disease changes, again, coming to points and saying, well, how are your values changed and how are we going to realign those medical treatments to align with your priorities? And then, we follow these patients often to their dying times. So we're always having really good conversation about what's important to them. We have conversation about what does dying look like, because a lot of people are so afraid of dying, and they have no experience with seeing people die. But death is a natural process as much as birth. So informing people about this is what dying looks like. It's a sacred time. It's probably the most sacred time in your entire life. It's an opportunity, especially with medical assistance in dying now on the scene. People are dying because they're afraid of dying. They want to die cleanly medically, but by shifting people into the medical dying, medically assisted, it's a medical model of dying, we take them away from that very natural, personal, sacred, I think, process as well. So that's what we do.
Nice. So every single day people die. And when we think about death, we all know it's inevitable, every single one of us. And at the same time, some of us are extremely scared of it. Some of us hope for a better tomorrow after that event occurs. And some of us don't care. Would you say?
I would say, as a species, we have a drive to survive.
Yes.
And so that faith, when people have a faith associated with their spirituality, and they have a hope that when life ends, or a belief that when life ends, there'll be something different, whatever that is, according to their spiritual belief system. But ultimately, people aren't welcoming death. It's still a scary process. It's like, I often say the end of life is much like the beginning of life. Like people, obviously you two haven't had a pregnancy and a baby, but when a woman gets pregnant, it's like, oh, I'm gonna have a baby. Oh my God, I'm gonna have a baby, And so we really moved from a system where women were having babies at home and their mothers and their grandmothers and aunties were all supporting them. And it was a community event. And there may be a midwife or a shaman or whatever in the culture that would be experienced in delivering babies. And we moved to the medicalization of birth. And then women became, I think there was a lot more fear associated with that as we moved away from that sort of indigenous type of having babies. And then we started seeing that, over medicalizing birth is really wrong. It's hard on the mother, it's hard on the baby, and mothers and babies do better when mothers are informed about the whole birthing process and given choice about how that looks, even if, something happens that's not great in the middle of labor and delivery. They know what the path goes like. They know they're going to be supported. They have a midwife in the room. They have their family. So we've moved into that model. And so the fear with prenatal classes and whatnot has dissipated. And we're looking at a more natural way of childbirth. And death, we haven't really gotten to there, right? People are afraid of dying. Even if they have faith that the afterlife is going to be good, the process of getting there is still terrifying for most people because they haven't witnessed what natural dying looks like. And as long as humanity has been on the planet, we've been dying. As long as we've been born, we have died. And the way our bodies die is relatively gentle. Yes, much like some women need a C-section and intervention to save mom and baby, sometimes we have to intervene in that process of dying because some people, it's rare, have intractable pain. And some people have real difficulty breathing. And so we have to deal with those issues. But natural dying is a process of people gradually losing energy. They're no longer getting up and around anymore. They're no longer really eating very much. And then they have no energy to really eat or drink or even wake up. And then they, are in bed all the time. And eventually they're asleep all the time with very short periods of being present for family and friends who have gathered together. And then eventually they drift off. And that is our natural process of dying. So when people have that knowledge about that and have a team of people, nurses or workers or physicians that can hold that time for them, then natural dying is okay. But what we see with some people is that they just can't get out of a sense of, oh my God, I'm dying. My life has no purpose. It has no meaning. I'm terrified. And they just wind up in this thought process that they just can't get out of. And that's the most difficult symptom to deal with. Pain we can deal with, shortness of breath we deal with, and nausea and constipation. But really this, what we call existential distress, has been previously something we really have struggled with helping people deal with.
I think most people fear death, majority people, because no one's seen what happens after death. It'd be different if it's like, okay, you're going to jump on a plane and you're going to be going to this destination and everyone's like, oh, excited about it. But when you don't know what that destination is and you're thinking like, what happens? Is there hell? Is there heaven? Are these demons going to come? Someone's going to come grab you and, what are they called? In Sikhi, they're called Jamdoots, messengers of death. And they basically go through your whole, all of your accounts and everything else it is, right? Every religion might be different, but there's always that fear because no one has gone to the other side and come back.
Well,
and
there
said,
have
hey,
been people that have gone to the other side. That's a near-death experience. And it's interesting because when people have these near-death experiences, regardless of their race and culture, their experience is very similar. Even in that context, I mean, as a species, we have this drive to survive, right? When the lion comes at us, we either fight or we flee. But the problem is when you have a terminal illness diagnosis, if you spend that time in fight or flee mode all the time, it's very difficult for you to live your life. And when you have a short period to live, you want every minute to be precious. And so you're wasting that period just in this idea of not knowing. And it's not even, I find the existential distress doesn't even come from the fear of judgment when you die or the fear of heaven or hell. What it comes from is the change in yourself where you no longer are the caregiver and now you need care. You no longer are the provider because you can't work anymore. And so what happens to your family, right? Oh, now your spouse has to work and what's going to happen to your children. And you can no longer be the guy that goes out and chops the wood. You have to hire somebody to do that. And so people, as they have identified with doing things all their life and now they can't do them anymore because of their disease, they lose a sense of who they are. And I'm the doer. I'm the person who looks after the kids and goes to work and tends this and does this, and I can no longer do that. Then who am I? I'm no longer that person. Life has no meaning because I can't do anything. So that's where, and this is a societal thing because we place value on ourselves and others by what we do. But really, when people are limited, they have to actually spend time with understanding who they are in that context, who they are, the being inside. So even though, you may be in an accident and you no longer can use your arms or legs, you're still the same person inside. But you have to grapple with, who am I now that I can't do these things? So the process of winding down, we have to spend time considering who we really are in a sense of being. How can I be just who I am without having to go and do things? So that's what we have to, as we age, we can't do the same things that we did when we were 20. And we have a slow way of every year, you get more sore, get more frail, you can't do those things. And over time, over decades, we learn to cope with that. But when you have a cancer diagnosis and you say you have 6 months, you have 6 months to deal with that. And it becomes very difficult to process.
Why we're here today and why I was really excited to speak with you was you are one of the first doctors and the first doctor in Canadian history to prescribe psychedelic mushrooms to patients through the healthcare system in Canada. And you were the first doctor to prescribe it through the special access program, as it's called now. There are a lot of what you described, specifically about you just get told you have 6 months left. I mentioned earlier, everybody dies. You just don't know that when that's happening. But when you do know that, you want to make those moments, like even you said now, as precious and as amazing as possible. In Canada right now, there seems to be a somewhat, if you want to call it cure or some sort of solution to this problem of end of life crisis. And it's natural. It only requires possibly a single dose or a very, not a daily dose or a monthly dose. And if done carefully, it can result in the select number of people that can't deal with that reality of death are suddenly able to come out of this psychedelic experience with a completely different outlook on life, their understanding of who they are, what's coming, and kind of going to the other side and coming back, if you will.
Basically, just the reason why psychedelics, and maybe just backtrack to the historical perspective. So way back in the 1950s, a fellow called Robert Wasson, he was a banker, but you could say mycologist. And he and his wife were like amateur mycologists. And they went to Mexico because they heard of a woman called Maria Sabina who was using psilocybin mushrooms, as it turned out, in a Maztec tradition in Oaxaca. And so they traveled there, and she actually invited them to partake in psilocybin-containing mushrooms. So this banker then really, unfortunately, brought this out, and it was publicized widely in the 1950s through Life magazine, and then tons of Westerners went in and disrupted the community, and it ended up that the community was so upset that their sacred tradition had been delivered to Westerners that they actually ostracized her from the community and burnt her house down, and she ended up dying in poverty because this Western guy went in and basically ruined her life by opening up this idea of what the potentials are of this psilocybin-containing mushroom. And then Albert Hofmann, who was the person who discovered LSD in the 1930s, he actually was able to purify the psychedelic component of the mushroom, which was psilocybin. And then we see this emergence of the psychedelic movement. And the first population of people that were treated with psilocybin in the 50s and 60s were terminally ill patients, because people figure, hey, risk management, right? These people are dying anyways, we'll see. And they found that people who had a lot of this distress, it was really effective for them. Then they started experimenting using LSD and psilocybin for people with substance use disorder, for treatment-resistant depression, yada, yada, yada. And the evidence was really compelling that these things were real game changers for the treatment of these things, conditions. But in 1970s, it sort of generated, with the recreational use of psychedelics, this whole movement, because when people are under the influence of a psychedelic, maybe many of them get the impression that, our consciousness is shared between all humanity, that we are connected to the plants and the animals and the sky and the earth. So we see the emergence of human rights. We see make love, not war. We see, environmental movement coming out of sort of that psychedelic. And when you think in the 1940s, World War II, every able-bodied man signed up to go to war. And then you think, now 15, 20 years in the future, they're all going, rallying, make love, not war. And then this was considered this big national crisis. And so, this is a security crisis. So Richard Nixon says, that's it. Psychedelics are banned.
War on drugs?
War on drugs started.
Crazy.
And so it shut down all the research. But just in 2016, we see the re-emergence of looking at the use of psilocybin for existential distress in terminally ill patients, and really looking at this evidence where people, under the right context of the set and setting, which means the preparation of being in an altered state, being able to keep the patient safe during their altered state, being able to integrate their experience into their life, that 80% of patients would actually have benefit. And that benefit can last anywhere between 6 months to 18 months. And so because of this evidence going forward, we fast track up into, 2020. And we have some individuals like Thomas Hartle saying, I've read about the potential of these mushrooms being able to treat my anxiety and depression with respect to my terminal illness. So he had a terminal bowel cancer. And so he applied through what we call a Section 56 exemption, which basically says, ask the government to be decriminalized for you. The psilocybin is still illegal, but for you have an exemption. You can take the mushroom, you can purchase it, you can store it, you can ingest it, and it's not illegal for you. So for a few years, I guess it was actually just 1 year, Patty Hadju was the Minister of Health, and she was really good about giving Section 56 exemptions to people who were terminally ill. And so Thomas was the first. I had a patient who I was really struggling with. It was a young woman who had metastatic cancer, and she had terrible intractable pain. We could not deal with her pain, and we sent her to tertiary palliative units. They could do nothing for her pain. She didn't respond to freezing in the spine, like an epidural. She didn't respond to that. And she would just huddle in her room, dark, sobbing all the time. And everybody was like, it's her existential distress. It's not fair. I am dying. I'm only 32 years old. I haven't lived my life. She couldn't talk about dying. She couldn't talk about living. And they said, well, this is what's informing her pain. This is what's making her pain unmanageable. So I talked to a fellow called Bruce Topin, who was really advocating for use of psilocybin. And he actually supported Thomas Hartle for his psilocybin journey because it was, again, a Section 56 exemption. So Patty Hadju gave us a Section 56 exemption within 24 hours for this patient. And we did a quick prep. And while she's in the medicine, she really had a very difficult journey or psychedelic experience. And we thought, we gave it a good try. She found it really difficult. She didn't like having altered state of consciousness. She asked for her father. He held her in her arms. She wept, and it was 6 hours. It seemed to be torture. And I said, well, we tried it. It doesn't seem to have worked. And then 24 hours later, her pain was gone. And we were ramping down all the pain medications, and then she could talk about dying, and she got all her friends and family together, and it was
way.
180-degree change. And I went,
That's insane.
this is it. I thought this was just research stuff. I saw this with my own eyes. With Bruce Topin had supported me with her, and I said, this is it. This is something we can offer those patients. We have nothing else. And so after that, I was exploring how we deliver this in a safe environment. And, over millennia, psychedelics have been used in the shamanic tradition where, a shaman in that community would gather the community together and support using psychedelics, rites of passage, births, deaths, sickness. And we thought, well, this is really the environment that people should be supported in, is community. If we think of human health as being the physical, the mental, it's relational, societal, and spiritual, then the psychedelics would be holding spiritual, but we should do it in community. So we moved to a community model where we bring patients together, we prepare them together, and they partake together with a room full of therapists and physicians and nurses to keep them safe, and then they integrate together. So our first cohort was 9 patients that were terminally ill through Section 56 exemptions, and they did very well. It's about 80% did well, 20% didn't really have benefit or found it very difficult and didn't want to really, they didn't buy into the integration. But 80%, it was phenomenal. And a lot of their existential distress we found actually comes from if they have a lot of previous trauma, they were able to process their trauma, and then that was the thing that was holding them back. And they were able to move through and process their own terminal illness. And so we moved through, we were working with Roots to Thrive, which was working with group therapy with a different psychedelic, which is ketamine. And then after a couple of cohorts, we have moved to looking at a clinical trial because we were accessing special access program because Section 56 exemptions had closed down under a new health minister. And so we were applying for patients, groups of patients, and then they said, look, you need to run a trial because you can't report on the benefits or the data unless it's through a clinical trial. You can't report or even do case studies on a special access program, access meds. So now we're looking at developing a clinical trial. But I do access psilocybin for individual patients right now because Health Canada won't allow me special access to like a whole bunch of psilocybin for a group of patients, but one-offs are fine. If a person has terminal illness, really, the turnaround time for me has been actually like a week. People aren't waiting for long periods of time. You just have to be really honest and fill out all the information they want. They usually get back to you if there's questions, and then you respond. So I haven't had negative experience with Health Canada at all.
So why are they not doing the group setting anymore?
They said that they perceive this as being a program, and they're not going to supply drugs for a program or medications for a program. So right now, we're not accessing mushrooms. We're accessing psilocybin extract in capsule form, which is produced by Filament, a company who's doing this. And they're providing the patients the psilocybin for free. But they have what we call a drug master file with Health Canada. So Health Canada approves that this psilocybin capsule has exactly the amount of psilocybin that's supposed to be in it, that it is safe, that it's been tested through all their testing procedures. And so we're using that substance. There's another, Psygen is another company that produces a synthetic psilocybin. So, and they also are providing it free of charge for patients, to my knowledge. So it was more about Health Canada wants studies because then we can publish our results. We can't do that through special access acquired medicine. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of reasons for that because the special access program is meant for a doctor, say I'm an oncologist and my patient, I've tried everything on them and they're going to die. And there's a treatment that's not approved yet in Canada, is under clinical trials. I can go to the drug company and say, hey, can I have one dose for my patient or therapy for my one patient? And they'll say, well, we're in the middle of a trial, it's not released in Canada. We don't want, if something goes wrong, we don't want that published, or if something goes, it's going to interfere with our trials, our own trials. So yes, we'll release it to you for special access for your patient. But then you have an obligation to report back to Health Canada what the outcome was with that patient. So it's not designed to supply, meds for reporting. So they said it's very important, and I understand that we have data to show that this medication is effective, that it is appropriate, that what the outcomes and risks and benefits are, right? And so they said you have to run a clinical trial if we're going to release batches of 8 or 9 capsules. And so that's where I'm struggling with now is, going through all the measures that are required for compliance with Health Canada clinical trials, and then doing a clinical trial, which will hopefully allow 40 people to have access to psilocybin in this trial over the course of a year. So we'll see.
So once this is done, years up, you have 40 people that have tried it. What's the next step then?
The next step would be, we'll be accumulating data through that time. And it's very important to, take the data in the appropriate way, and you have to file the data, and it's all observed, so people can't tamper with the data, right? So you need clean data, and has to be stored cleanly and tamper-proof. You have to have safety board that monitors the safety of the patients and make sure that you're compliant with all the Health Canada regulations. So it's a big deal running a clinical trial. But ultimately, what we hope to do is take cohorts of 8 patients, move them through a curriculum, which really moves them through understanding what's happening in their body, ways of what we call self-regulation when you're really, really going crazy, like how you can calm yourself. And what we're using now is a spiritual curriculum. The idea of the possibility of being more than just your physical meat body and a brain on top of a meat body, that you may be more, the possibility you may be more in spirit. And because psilocybin is a spiritual experience, so we prep them in group for a spiritual experience, then we give them psilocybin, and then we, in group, integrate the learning you got from your psilocybin experience into your life.
You're trying to do a clinical trial right now. And also, is there a lack of demand, I guess I should say? Or is there, you have a lot of people that are lined up that want to join this? I'm just curious about that perspective.
Yeah. The problem, it's interesting because the problem is that we've had patients that say, okay, I want to join. So right now we run the same curriculum without psilocybin, and they say, we want to join in, but sometimes they join in and they die halfway through, or they're waiting for the next session and then they die waiting. And that's kind of the problem, because a lot of these patients have a very variable trajectory. They can look great, and then 2 weeks later they can look not so great. So I would say when we start recruiting, then we're hoping that people all over BC, not just Vancouver Island, will be able to refer their patients, because the preparatory sessions, integration sessions are on Zoom, and then there's only one in-person session. So we're hoping that we can draw from the whole province.
When it comes to clinical trials of non-psychedelics, it seems like there's a lot going on. You hear about clinical trials all the time. For someone listening right now, somebody even like both of us, we don't really know the process of clinical trials and how easy it is to get them approved and the process during, et cetera. It sounds like you're struggling with that. Do you feel that other pharmaceutical companies are struggling with clinical trials, and why or why not?
Pharmaceutical companies, they spend billions of dollars in research and development. They have their own clinical trial department, and they're running trials all the time. So they're different levels. So, you have to run a clinical trial. Look, it's like a level 1, you could say. And you run this clinical trial just to show that you're not going to kill people by by administering it. And then you do a level 2, which is healthy volunteers, where you're going to see, these are the effects. You pay people to take your drug, and then you look at the effect. And then you go to treating people for the indication. And these are, again, our volunteers. And you say, will this actually have benefit to this indication? And then you go to another stage where you're doing a comparison. This is the treatment now. This is our new treatment. Is this one actually superior? Right? And then you ran what we call randomized double blind, where you don't tell the patient which treatment they're getting, and the doctors don't know which treatment you're getting till you break the code at the end of the study. So there are different levels of trials. Psilocybin, unfortunately, is a natural product, so you can't, there's no money in it, right? Because there's no, what is it called? Patent.
Yes.
So a drug company, the way they get their R&D money back is they patent the drug, and then they make loads of money on it when it's sold and basically when your patients start paying for it. So that's where they recoup their money. So with psilocybin, it's a natural product. You can't actually patent it. So because you can't patent it, there's no money in it. So there's no research money available except maybe research dollars through the Canadian Research Department, right? Like there is some money available, but very little for psychedelic research.
So how did you get approval for, like, how did you pay for the first one? We know you're fundraising for this upcoming one, but for the first one.
So we haven't started the trial yet. So what we need to do is we need to, well, we have a budget now, and our health authority, Vancouver Island Health Authority, is actually has been supporting us with their clinical trials department. But we
Nice.
have to raise $350,000 in order to, pay for running the trial. Although Island Health supplying a lot of support, we still need that money.
Makes sense.
And, for a regular drug, it takes millions of dollars to do a clinical trial. So this is actually a clinical trial on the skinny. We're actually running it for a very, very, very low budget. So hopefully, and it's going to have to come from private donors. You apply for a grant, it takes like a year and a half to figure out if you're going to get a grant. There are not a whole lot of grants for this kind of thing. I know Calgary recently received a grant, but it's a big institution. And so, we have to compete against these big institutions for grants. Very difficult for us. So we're really looking for private donors. Philanthropy is the best way to fund these kind of clinical trials.
So if everything goes good with this trial, then what are you hoping to get after? Is it going to be just for end of life? Is it going to be for trauma, addictions?
It's going to be for end of life, but what we're trying to demonstrate is that this model, which is in group, which is the spiritual preparation, integration, that this is a feasible way of delivering psilocybin, and that we can treat many more patients with less resources. Because right now, for psychedelic treatment, you have to have a therapist and a physician. So this would be a patient, right? So patient's paying a physician and a therapist for the preparation, and then the 6 to 8 hours of the treatment, and then for the integration. And that can be, run between $5,000 and $10,000 for a patient. And most patients who are terminally ill are not working, and they're on disability, and they don't have that kind of cash to be able to support, a private psilocybin session. But if we treat them in group, we can have a physician and therapist prep 8 people at once and integrate 8 people at once. And then we have sort of a group of physicians, nurses, and therapists for one-to-one. So you have 8 professionals to 8 patients in the room, providing very safe space, and then be able to provide the treatment in a group. And so if that model works, I think it can be, basically rolled out to treatment of depression and anxiety, treatment of substance use disorders, treatment of alcoholism. Interestingly, the AA program, 12-step program, I think it was Bill Wilson was the developer. He actually experienced LSD, and he felt that the 12-step program, which is a very spiritual-based program in group, would be way better, and developed it so you could use LSD in the group. And in Saskatchewan,
Wow.
Weyburn, Saskatchewan had one of the largest LSD clinics for substance use disorder and mental health.
In Saskatchewan?
In Saskatchewan, before Nixon closed down
Okay.
psychedelic
Wow.
treatment and research. So really this 12-step program, which today is still very effective, based on a spiritual a group model of treatment using a spiritual model, is still going today and is very effective. And then they expanded it to Narcotics Anonymous as well. So I think the group is very important, and I think it actually enhances the psychedelic because people are experiencing this in community the way it always has been experienced, like for millennia. So we're trying to demonstrate with this clinical trial that it's better for patients, it's less impact on the healthcare system, that it's very impactful positively on the patient's healthcare. So I think psychedelics could be a game changer for mental health, substance use, but it all starts with these little clinical trials using the terminally ill patients and demonstrating benefit.
I mentioned earlier, we don't know a lot about clinical trials. When I hear 80%, I think 80% is really good. So can you share with people listening, you mentioned 80%, and we will talk about those clinical trials, and I want to talk about what happens and why there's a 20%, what actually happened. Because when you read the study, especially if you only read the first page, which you were kind enough to share with me, it kind of just brushes over it and says, well, 2 out of
Something
9.
two to
So-
9 that really struggled.
But it says in there that those 2 increased, they got worse. So when somebody reads that and says, oh, well, I read your freaking document. And I want to just say, first of all, 80%, let's just talk about just the 80% first. How does that relate to other clinical trials that get approved federally and, everywhere across North America, maybe the world? What is the efficacy rate that they usually look at? I understand it varies depending on the context.
I mean, some treatments for diseases, like chemotherapy, the success rate is 10%.
Oh my goodness.
You have people that are on their third
never
line
hear
of
that.
chemo,
never hear
and the
that.
success rate is 10%, but people will still do it. So when you look at really any treatments, I mean, there's nothing out there that's 100%.
Makes sense.
Because everybody's different,
Yeah.
and so you go in for your blood pressure. Oh, your blood pressure's high. Try this med. Oh, it didn't work. We're going to try a different med. It's so 80% is a phenomenal number for benefit. When we say, did 20% get worse? 20% had no benefit. I'm not sure that they got worse per se. There's some people that we had one fellow who had a really difficult experience, but he didn't come back for the therapy to integrate. And so he really struggled. He thought that the treatment just brought back a lot of trauma and he wasn't able to process it. But he went back to therapy, he was able to process it, and then he had another treatment of psilocybin like 6 months later. And he had an amazing experience, and it totally changed his perspective. So it really depends on the preparation. And since then, our preparation curriculum has totally changed. It's much more, and the way we use the psilocybin is we're trying to move away from that medical, here's a drug, it's going to work for you, to more, this is a community. We're going to do this as a ritual. We're doing it as a ceremony in the way it has been done for millennia. And we find that people really resonate with this because spirituality is people access their spirituality through ritual and ceremony. I mean, that's what religion has been. But even people who are not religious but spiritual, they may access spiritual. I go for a walk in the woods, or I sit on the beach and watch the waves, or I give thanks, whenever I eat for the food that I have. It's that helps us connect with our spirit. And so when we use that kind of format, I find with our patients, it resonates with them, and really dying is a spiritual crisis. Let's face it, right? And so moving into that realm of supporting people with community and spirituality, it's been even though medicine has said yes, people are physical, emotional, mental, communal, and spiritual. Modern medicine has completely discounted the communal and the spiritual. And when I look at people with substance use disorder, we have the worst crisis right now. We have the opioids crisis. So many people are using substances to self-soothe. There is existential distress in our society that's unbelievable right now. And by medicalizing it, I think we've done a disservice. I personally believe that the crisis we see is spiritual crisis. People don't know who they are in the context of, what's going on societal around them, expectations that are placed on them. They lose capacity to understand themselves. And so the anxiety and the depression and the isolation, it all comes with substance use, or whatnot. And so really we've moved from from totally medicalizing people, and now the spiritual distress that people have has resulted in the crisis that we're seeing today. So, I believe that psychedelics support people's spirituality. They actually can move from a place of, I don't understand who I am, to, oh, I feel connection. I feel connection to everyone. I feel connected to humanity. I feel connected to nature. I'm more than just this meat bag. And if you're only a meat bag, life has no meaning. If your meat bag can't work, what's the point? So we're more than that. And that's what the psychedelics do. But, medically, the psychedelics will disrupt those pathways in your brain that have been stuck into a thought pattern.
Mm-hmm.
It disrupts that, and it allows your brain to be open to more possibility. And that's how they medically work. But, what we've witnessed with people has
Deeper
been
than that.
so deep. I had one patient, she couldn't function outside her home. She would cry. She was just a mess. And she had this terrible cancer diagnosis. And in the medicine, she said, she was very traumatized. She had PTSD from decades of abuse. And she said, in the medicine, she revisited every traumatic event in her life. And it was like an open book. And she went, oh, that's my learning. That's what my spirit had to learn. Close the book, move to the next one. Oh, that was my learning. Close the book. And she came out of this. Her pain was better. She was out in the world. She was moved out of her daughter's house. She was living independently. Whole new life, from that one experience of being able to process all the trauma that was holding her and making her feel like she was just meaningless. Life was purposeless. There was nothing left for her to do. So seeing those transformations from somebody coming in paralyzed by fear to people walking out of the room straight,
Insane.
It's after one treatment. And yes, we've had people that have exceeded their prognosis, that have lived longer than expected, and they have had, more and more anxiety over the course of a year, and we've retreated them. And we've had some people that we've treated 3 times because they've lived that long with metastatic disease. But they've lived that long with metastatic disease with a sense of purpose and meaning.
I think that a lot of people watching this may look at this and go, they don't agree with this. They don't agree with this medicine. There's a lot of people that may have that opinion due to lack of education on this topic, which I think is majority of it, or because of other education that forced them to teach them that, hey, this is not like traditional medicine, like psychedelics, as in traditional medicine from back in the day, is not nearly as safe or effective. And some people may argue that, they'll say this to me. They may not say it to you, but, you're just, somebody, just did mushrooms, or you just did mushrooms one time and then you just had a crazy trip and now you guys are just so weird. You guys are so you guys are just hippies just trying to, oh my gosh, what's wrong with you? And if I'm being honest, the first time I ever met someone that had shared a psychedelic experience with me, which was obviously not a ceremony like you're describing, they were describing all these profound things. And to me and a few other people in the conversation were like, what's going on with this person? This person's because you can't describe this spiritual journey because everyone's is different and not everyone's going to relate and all these things. What do you say to a skeptic? Some people that are in the healthcare system. Many of them.
And I mean, there is science. If you look at the studies, there is benefit. People, it's not randomized, double-blind, controlled, and it's you can't give somebody a placebo for
I know.
psychedelic.
I was gonna say you can't.
What are you gonna do?
Bring dragons into the room that fly in the air.
So it's very difficult, but it's the before and after. And yes, there are other, people access all kinds of different things. They may drumming, or they go to sound baths, or they go whatever people do, walk in nature to connect with spirit. It's so hard, to do these sort of treated, non-treated. What we hope to do is, because we run this curriculum without medicine, we hope to actually have a control group then. These people are coming into the program, they're having a spiritual connection with each other. We do a sound bath instead of psilocybin. And we're hoping that we can retrospectively say, these people did not have psilocybin. There was no expectation for them to have a psychedelic. This is how they benefited from a program. This is the program with psychedelic. So we do have sort of a control. Some studies that have tried to do a randomized control study found that there was bad outcome in the people that were expecting to get a psychedelic but didn't, and they got a control, and they were like it made no difference, and so they did poorly, right? So there's a lot of difficulty with this sense of bias. As far as people saying, well, these are dangerous drugs. Well, psilocybin, you can't actually overdose on psilocybin. Like, it's pretty safe. Certainly MDMA, there's lots of difficulties with MDMA because it can cause difficulty, mental health difficulties. It can, a lot of interactions. It's very stimulating, can cause cardiac issues. Ketamine is another one. LSD is another one. Ketamine can cause cardiac issues, respiratory issues. We do it in a very medical environment, and I have used ketamine as a psychedelic as well, for different reasons. But opioids are really dangerous when they're taken recreationally. We all know that. But if you have cancer, you need opioids. If you're coming out of surgery, you need opioids. And used in the correct context, it has therapeutic benefit. If you use it in the wrong context, it can be deadly. You can overuse insulin and die, but used in the right context, it's a life-saving drug. So we always have to think of things in context. And
then you look at alcohol, where there's been no clinical trials, nothing at all. It kills more people than any other drug.
Absolutely. Like alcohol, nicotine. Nicotine is a drug. People are addicted to. They think it's the worst drug for addiction. Like, people find it so difficult. And interestingly, they've done some clinical trials looking at nicotine addiction and using psilocybin, and found that it's amazing when people have substance use disorder or nicotine addiction, it really can change and decreases you would say it improves the quit rate by a phenomenal amount in those studies. I don't know the exact numbers, but it's like unheard of.
Not just nicotine, I think even heroin and other, or like opioids.
Oh yeah,
It's
opioids,
helped people get off
alcohol. And there's certain psychedelics that are better for opioids, like ibogaine, but again, that's illegal. You can access it in different countries. It's associated more with cardiac side effects and should be given in an institution, but people don't go through opioid withdrawal, and they have clear benefit for addiction to opioids. So there's a lot of benefit, but again, we're not getting no one's studying this stuff because there's no money in it. Like the pharmaceutical industry, if they can make money on it, it goes forward. If you can't make money on it, it doesn't go anywhere.
It's just a business, that's it.
It's business decision.
So, like, you hear a lot of people go to Peru and all these other places for ayahuasca and whatnot for, for trauma, PTSD, for substance abuse issues. This clinical trial that you want to do that's going to take up to a year. After you do the studies, would you guys be applying basically just to have it sort of legalized, or be able to, give it out
It's
prescriptions?
a step. I think it's a step towards legalization,
but
for sure.
For not just for end of terminally ill people, but also for people with PTSD, trauma, substance abuse.
And I think that would be informing other clinical trials for those, but it may be, the more clinical trials that are done, because nobody does one clinical trial and the government changes its mind. It has to be multiple trials, multiple researchers showing benefit. Don't ask me why for this, but when you look at the pharmaceutical industry, they just need to do like a couple and they're good, right?
Interesting.
So there have been many
they
drugs.
write fat checks to the parties.
There's a lot with the pharmaceutical industry. There are drugs that get through that really have very little substantiating evidence that they have benefit. Mm-hmm. But these people, they have lobbyists in the government. Like really, the FDA and Health Canada really had to knuckle down and say, you have to publish your negative studies. You can't just say, oh, that study didn't show benefit, we're not going to publish it. Oh, that study didn't show, we're not going to publish. Oh, this one showed benefit, we'll publish that one.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of messing around with the pharmaceutical industry and getting very expensive drugs to the market that really don't have significant benefit. So, but with psychedelics, no one's making money on them. Nobody's lobbying for them. People that are lobbying for them now are dying. So,
So the government, do they ever spend money? Do they have grants to give out to
They do,
these
but
studies?
there's not a whole lot of grants around there for that. There are a lot of other needy programs that are looking for research dollars, right? Like people looking at treating dementia. That's very important, as our aging population grows, or treating Parkinson's disease or cancer. A lot of dollars go into looking at treatments for cancer. Or a lot of research dollars go into treatments that are designed to prolong life. No research dollars in spending money looking at
quality of life.
improving quality of life.
So, sorry, from a prisoner perspective, government's always talking about, tough on crime and all this stuff. I think if they did some clinical trials on psilocybin to treat trauma, PTSD, all that kind of stuff, and, real rehabilitation for people going to prison would be if there's even a 50% chance that these people will heal some of their sort of traumas and whatnot and get out and be proper, productive members of society. I think the benefits on that would be huge.
I think I think psychedelics have this potential to be a game changer in mental illness, mental health, whatever, because of the ability to process trauma. And, Gabor Mate, I don't know if you know of him, he's a physician that looked at substance use disorder.
It's so funny. Last podcast we did with a therapist, we spoke about him. And the next day I talked to my friend, and there was actually a fundraiser for the victims in Palestine. And he was a keynote speaker there.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, he's amazing.
Because he really talks about how chronic disease, substance use disorder, a lot of this comes from trauma, from childhood trauma, or problems with attachment to parents or whatnot. And so if we heal that, we're treating the underlying cause for a lot of these issues. So I think psychedelics have the potential to change this, but there's no one supporting it. There's no dollars supporting it. It's easier to just throw money at prisons and throw money at, antidepressants and throw money at anti-anxiety, or even, looking at even entertaining the idea of offering physician-assisted suicide for people with mental illness. Like, these are the kinds of things where it doesn't make any sense to me when you have something that's very inexpensive that can be like so impactful and a life changer, a natural substance, life changing. So maybe things will shift where psychedelics will again start emerging as potential therapeutic interventions. And again, this is a therapy. There are so many people desperate for some hope. They've been on multiple drugs. They can't get off their substances. There's a big underground movement, like going to Peru for ayahuasca. There's lots of underground therapists using psilocybin, LSD, MDMA, ibogaine, ayahuasca in the underground. So the problem is when in the underground, there's no professional accountability. So you can be a therapist and you could put your shingle out in the underground. People will come to you and get treatment, but I've seen bad outcomes from people receiving treatment from people who are not qualified. And there's this whole problem when you have a therapist, and this has been, there's so many accounts of sexual abuse of people who are altered and then their therapists are on them. Even in the MDMA clinical trials, this was found captured on a video where a participant in this trial was being molested by her therapist. So, when there's no professional accountability, because all this is in the underground, people are at risk. But if we brought it overground, where professionals are accountable, where your college is saying, is this within your scope of practice? Are you practicing with the proper qualifications? Are you following your patients? These are the standards which we would hold you accountable by. Then, if you're molesting a patient who's under the influence, there's a reporting process and there's an accountability process where you can lose your license. But right now, people are in the underground, they get molested and there's no way for them to complain because they've just been taking an illegal substance. Yeah. So it's dangerous and people are desperate, but they're willing to go through that risk in order to find relief of their suffering.
Who responds best to this medicine?
So that's excellent question, because we have found with, we haven't treated a whole bunch of people. I mean, maybe 35, 40 people. We found that there are some people who respond well and some people who don't. So people who don't respond well are people who say, I just want a pill, make me better.
The magic pill.
The magic pill. Because really we talk about intense preparation, we talk about integration, and the potential for a very difficult journey where people may have nothing else but a sense of overwhelming nausea. We had one patient, overwhelming nausea, that for 6 hours, she had overwhelming nausea. And when the therapist said, what does the nausea mean to you? What is the nausea trying to tell you? She said, it's telling me that I have to stop acting unauthentically, that I have to be my authentic person. Nausea went away, just like that. So sometimes people have a very physical experience, and unless you prep them properly, they find it difficult to integrate. Some people, they want the magic pill. They're not willing to do any prep. They don't want to be integrated. They go in, they go, oh, well, I just saw some things. It didn't make any difference to me. And they walk out, and that doesn't work very well. People who have a lot of trauma, they have to be prepared to probably revisit that trauma and have the skills to regulate themselves. We don't touch people except hold their hand or shoulder, maybe feet. It's because we have to keep our patients safe. And we ask them ahead of time, is it okay if I hold your hand or touch your shoulder? If you ask for that in the session ahead of time, to make sure that there's informed consent for touch. So if people have a physical experience, we have to teach them ahead of time breathing techniques, sometimes tapping techniques to just make themselves feel secure. We may put a weighted blanket on them, but the patients can't be like roughed up and touched and. So people who are not willing to learn those kind of self-regulation techniques, we don't think it's a good idea to give psilocybin. People who, when we talk about psilocybin, people have messages, and the messages are not in English, and they're not words, they are metaphors. So somebody may see themselves approaching a tree with a door in it, and that door will symbolize like the threshold between life and death. Or somebody may see like something else that's it's very metaphorical. Crazy. And they have to actually figure out, like the nausea, what does the nausea tell you? What is it trying to tell you? What is, being underwater or under the whole sense was like she was under a mountain and she was being like pushed down and pushed down. It's like, what did that experience mean to you? And you have to prepare them for that. And if people they're so rigid that they cannot understand metaphor, they're very concrete, they have real difficulty, like even understanding altered state of consciousness. And people who really can't figure out, they're very, very concrete, they panic. They panic in an altered state because there's no grounding. They just can't, they're not imaginative. They can't even imagine being out of body. So they do not do well. So it's really about screening the most appropriate people.
We can talk a little bit more about screening in a second, but I want to talk about the actual process, if you don't mind sharing a little bit. So you talked a lot about, okay, we need to prepare them. They need to be educated. There's a curriculum. How long is this process? Is it a 1 session? Is it 5 sessions? Does it depend? And then can you give us some examples? Like if you were going to prep me for it, what would and obviously it's unique to each person, but, and I guess it starts off the same with some questions and then it goes in a different direction. But can you just share for people that have no idea what you mean by preparation? They're not just going, and you're not advocating for people to just come into your office, you give them some mushrooms, and yes.
So the first step is to determine really what the sense of that person's distress is. What is their suffering? Is it anxiety about dying, anxiety about, sometimes a person has a lot of anxiety about what dying looks like, and we have a conversation about what dying looks like naturally and how we're going to support them, and then they're fine, right? So it's not everybody needs psychedelics. It's a person who just I'm awake at night, I can't sleep, during the day, there's nothing else on my thoughts but dying and death and what's going to happen to me, and life has no meaning anymore because I can't do stuff. And so it's finding the person who really is suffering. And then we actually do a very robust sort of mental health questionnaire. We would do a physical thing, make sure that they physically are able to be well enough, because psilocybin, it's physically hard on some people to go through. Some people are like this and it's fine, and other people it's like up and like breathing and then feeling like there's pressure on their chest, or they can't breathe, or they're being suffocated, and it can be very physically hard. And I'm not going to take somebody who's super frail who can't get out of bed necessarily give them psilocybin. I tend to only give psilocybin to my own patients who I know very well and I have a relationship with already. But even those people, we go through, what is your past trauma history? Because people with trauma, it all may come up in the medicine. So we have to be prepared for that. And they have to be, consenting to that potentially happening. We want to make sure they don't have bipolar disorder or history of schizophrenia, because some people can get psychotic if they're, if they have a family history of schizophrenia or a history themselves, or dissociative disorder. People can feel like in the medicine for many, many days and can't, ground themselves. So we exclude people with those kinds of disorders of thinking. Borderline people have difficulty navigating a psychedelic. I think they need to have a really good therapist to be working with them. So I'm not I have therapists that work with me, but that person has to be committed to having ongoing therapy, which they would have to pay for themselves, right? So we make sure that they're not taking medications that would interact with psilocybin. So it is a process. It's a medical intake, psychological intake, and then the preparation is really learning techniques of self-regulation, being able to be mindful of what's happening in your body, understanding the difference between pain and suffering, or understanding what suffering is. Understanding, and this is the most important thing, is self-compassion. Because this is the thing, people with existential distress are often have very low self-compassion. If they can't be productive, they're useless, they're wasted space. And so when we feel compassionate about ourselves, we can be compassionate about the situation we're in, and then, we're actually more graceful in accepting care. Where a lot of people, if somebody has to wipe my bum, I'm out of here, right? And the dignity of dying isn't about somebody wiping your bum or not. The dignity of dying is being able to receive care gracefully and with grace. So when I see the most dignified deaths that I see are people that are accepting the care, surrounded by caregivers, surrounded by family and friends, just soaking up the love, and those are the dignified deaths.
Like, even I was watching Thomas's video yesterday. I think a lot of people, it's not only I was a caregiver, I was a provider, but also it's like attachment. Attachment is so painful, because now it's like, what's going to happen to my kids? I'm going to miss out on these big major milestones and whatnot, weddings, grandchildren. So all that stuff, it's so much suffering that I can't even imagine what people go through.
And, regardless of how wealthy you are or how poor, in the end, it's always the same. The people that you love, it's the loss of attachment. And this is with natural dying, I find, is as people get weaker and more tired, they lose the attachment to their bodies. They become ready to detach from their bodies or die. And their family is witness to that. And, when you watch somebody dying, you see they're on the threshold. They open their eyes, they're not really there. They close their eyes, they open, they're there. They're not really there. Like, they're on that threshold. And the family can witness that detachment and that process, because it happens over time, allows them to let go too. And then there's a whole conversation about after, usually people are whisked away to the funeral home. And there's a group of people that believe that the old days, they used to wake people, right? So the body would be in a space, and then people could gather and visit the body. And then over a process of days, people were able to let go, and it allowed them to process their grief. So the more natural these things happen, the more people can process and release their attachment. When you have somebody who's killed by a logging truck, shock. People can't process it. The pierce is there, they're gone. And it's so hard for people, or even suicide's the worst, you know, to have friends and family process. Where it's like they're there, they're gone, they were suffering. We didn't know they were suffering to that extent. They were suffering so bad that dying was worse, you know, was better than living. So when we talk about that attachment, you know, I think that's natural process of dying. We all want to live, but in the natural process, people do let go. Most people. There are a few people that just won't let go, but most people do let go.
In reintegration, can we just talk about what that looks like? Did you talk about, like, I guess just like what that meeting looks like afterwards? Because you've mentioned, okay, are you ready for this? Are you the right fit?
Yeah.
Okay, we've discovered that. Now we've gone ahead and done this whole journey and experience, and there's a lot that came in that moment. But then you talk a lot about, especially those that didn't have the best experience. They didn't even come back for this reintegration.
Yeah. I had one patient who felt a lot of grief about putting her mother in an old age home. And during her psychedelic experience, she had these visuals of, like, there were these neon lights that say mother, mother, mother. And she just sort of got up and said, I'm not dealing with this. This is ridiculous. It's just hallucinations. And then she refused to integrate it. And I was thinking, that was so important. You are processing the guilt that you had, that you promised your mother you would never put her in a home. You put her in a home and she died in a home. That is something you needed to deal with. And your spirit was saying, mother, mother, we must deal with this. But she didn't show up for integration. She just said it was a bunch of hallucinations, and she never benefited from it. So that's the kind of person where we go, or the fellow that didn't show up because, you know, he was on holidays and stuff like that, and he had a really difficult experience. Difficult, but then when he went back and integrated with the therapist, it was more meaningful, and then he went for another session and had a life-changing experience. So it is about, how am I going to take this? What is the meaning? My brain, my subconscious, my spirit, whatever you call it, is giving me a message about something I need to process to move forward. What is the message? Sometimes we get people to draw, write journals. We have them write a journal about, we have them meditate, we have them try. I mean, this isn't a therapist telling you what it meant. Like, it's an opportunity to talk to people that get it in group. Hey, tell me about your spirit. What do you think that meant? Oh, this is what I'm feeling in my body when you tell me that. This is the emotion that comes up for me. You know, that is being heard, being, you know, how you have a problem and you talk out loud and it helps you kind of figure it out. That's kind of the integration. How is this?
Unpacking everything.
Unpacking, right? You have to unpack it. You can take your suitcase and throw it in the closet, or you can unpack it. And the unpacking can sometimes be painful, right? But if we're not willing to do it.
Yeah, I mean, this actually reminds me, in high school, there was a program that went around to different schools called Dare to Care. Ever heard of it? So when you mentioned the community and you know, maybe sitting in a circle, I imagine it, right?
Yeah.
People sitting down and talking. In high school, they had teachers select a few students from their class, and I was nominated by chance. I was probably the loud, obnoxious kid. That's why I was picked. But they picked some quiet kids. They picked the bullies. They picked the athletes, and we were all in a room together. And we ended up doing like this whole vulnerable. At first, everyone's like, "This is gonna be so cringe. It's gonna be so weird." And I was like, whatever. And then, like, the biggest, like, the best athlete of the school, basically celebrity of the school, breaks down, talks about his freaking problems in that setting. Obviously, then there was the it girl, this girl that was like the it girl of our school, of her grade. She was older than me. It was all grade ages. I was in like grade 10, and then there was 11s and 12s there. So I'm like, oh my God, it's that girl. She talks about her trauma and breaks down. And we're in the circle. No psilocybin, right? Just us. And the power of hearing someone else, break down or be vulnerable in that setting where you are also trying to navigate through your own thing, it makes it easier. I've had Mindy share some stories over the years now on and off the podcast, which make me go, wow, he's willing to say that, especially on the podcast. It's like, okay, like I should be okay with maybe saying something that I'm feeling a little bit uncomfortable about, right? So when you mention this whole sitting together thing,
It's
I can
so
feel
powerful.
it's extreme, because again, it's that you have that some sort of relatability there, because these people are also going through that same
Yeah.
door. They're opening that door and going in it.
And if you think about it, say you had cancer, right? You're like, I need to protect everybody around me. Like oh, mom, it's fine. I'm fine.
Yeah.
I'm so fine. Like, don't worry about me. And you talk to your brother, you put on this mask that you feel you have to do because, you're unable to express your vulnerability and your fear and your anxiety because you protect everybody around you. So in a group that comes together and shares their vulnerability, you can see each other for you, who you are, and you can feel heard and seen, finally. And that is healing. So when we talk about medicine, it's trying to cure people. They're trying to cure, and you get on this gerbil wheel and there's no cure, but there's no healing. And healing is spiritual. And you can heal while you're dying. And we had this one fellow in our group who's a poet, and he said, I didn't understand that I had to die before I was healed, but now I feel healed. He said this in the group. It was just like so amazing. So, we say, psilocybin it can be the WD-40 for the nut, right? But the real undoing the nut is community, which is why we want to do psychedelics in this kind of community, because it makes a huge difference.
Healing when there is no cure is what I asked you. When I asked you for a thesis of all this, you said healing when there is no cure.
So is psilocybin only for people who have trauma or trying to come to terms with death and whatnot? What if someone is totally normal and they want to do psilocybin? What are the...
Well, hold on. Have you done psilocybin?
Well, I have, but I had a Section 56 exemption to train in the medicine.
Nice. So
Back
you can
in
speak
the
on this
day.
in that way. Okay.
Yeah. And so, it is it totally altered my life. It is a life-altering experience, but, so you have to understand that psychedelics have been used for tens of thousands of years, and they've bing used in ceremony. So the Eleusinian mysteries are basically in Greece. People like the big famous people like Plato and Socrates and whatnot, they would every year go to a temple, and what was done in the temple was secret. But these people kind of emerged from the temple with these crazy ideas about mathematics and the universe and philosophy. So in the temple, they've taken these the sacramental vessels that they would have the sacrament with and tested it, and there were psychedelics in that. So people were coming together in Greece and partaking in communal psychedelics. When we look in Mexico, communities would come together with the shaman, and that shaman would support the use of psilocybin. And when we look at the indigenous communities of the United States, they would use peyote in ceremony. So these are not necessarily, treating medicinal. It was a communal, ceremonial, ritualistic, spiritual experience. We look at Africa, they use ibogaine. And they were, wherever you were in whatever community it was, there were psychedelics growing in the earth of some kind that the community had discovered over a millennia and found ways to use it.
Well, they say that humans advanced rapidly. If you've watched those documentaries,
Yeah, there's
about
some
it,
people who
there's
feel
some
that
theories that say that where did all this evolution come from? Just some bunch of people just ate mushrooms and then thought of. I think that.
it was a connection to. What did the difference between your dog and a human is, did we move from animal to sentient beings with the discovery of psychedelics? That is some people's theory.
You don't think so?
I do
Don't
not
care.
have the information to be able to make a informed decision about
Very
that either way.
doctor-like. Very
So,
good answer
I
for
did
the podcast.
time with a lot of Indigenous people inside. I never knew any Indigenous people except for growing up in Calgary for about 6 years. There's a few Indigenous kids that went to school with us, but we weren't really close with anybody. I knew nothing about the culture. I had no clue until I went to prison and sat down with these guys. A lot of these guys became my brothers. I became really tight with them. And you hear their stories and you see people from different walks of life.
Thank you so much for listening to another episode of Limelight. And if you enjoyed it and you made it this far, you can support us for free by just subscribing to us on YouTube, following us on Instagram, X, or TikTok, or rating us 5 stars on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, and liking us and following us there as well. So would love to know in the comments if you learned something new about psychedelics, or if you already knew this was just proving the point. In part 2, we talk more about the healthcare system in Canada. There's some things that you really open up our eyes to that we had no idea. If you have a request for a certain guest that you think we should have on based on the topics we've discussed on this episode or beyond, we have an anonymous box, we have an Instagram, we have an email. There's so many ways you can reach us. So hit us up. Thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you guys next week.